So,
Just to keep it all official, we are going to record this meeting.
okay,
19.
My name's Bobby Wheeler. I'm Board of Health. If you want to introduce,
yeah, I
Well,
think
let
we'll
me-
do introductions when the rest of my staff join in.
Yep.
certainly.
Oh, here we go.
Oh,
Yep, I got it.
okay.
At least I think I do. Why is that not working? Come on.
I'm bringing her up.
Okay, yeah, because I try and my machine frozen. There we go. Okay, so
I don't think I have room for chairman, but.
That's okay.
let's see.
And Nicole is joining us as well.
Yep,
And you and Billy got to get closer together, Paul. I can't see your face.
All right, he's got a cold.
Oh, jeez. That's good. That's bad.
I
No, okay.
think, is Nicole coming in?
Yep, there she
Yep,
is.
here she comes. And I think we'll get started. I don't know if Paul is available. I think she jumped onto another meeting.
Is that Rebecca, Nicole, yeah, there she is. And Jim is off.
I'm here.
Hi, Jim.
Okay. why don't
Okay,
we
let me
get
do
started?
let me get the meeting started. This is
Yep.
December 19th meeting of the Berlin Board of Health in conjunction with various members of the DEP and First Parish Church. It's being conducted via Zoom. Recording is being made so that this meeting can be viewed at any time. Anybody who wishes to speak will be given that opportunity, and they can always get back to us. And I'll forego the rest of the state preamble on that, and let's get started with this meeting. I guess I would turn to you, Bob, Mr. Bostwick, first.
Okay. That sounds good.
to
Let me have my
Take the
staff.
ball.
and let's have the DEP people introduce themselves.
Okay,
I'm Bob Bostwick. I'm the Drinking Water Section Chief out of the Worcester office for Mass DEP. April?
Hi, I'm April Deklos. I'm the Sanitarian Survey and Enforcement Coordinator, in the Central Region, and I report to Bob.
Nicole?
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Isachowski. I work for Mass DEP in Worcester as an environmental analyst.
And Rebecca?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rebecca Fauscher. I am the PFAS Section Chief in the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup. So I work in a different group than Bob, also in the Central Region in Worcester. Nice to meet everybody.
And the other person that might join in is Paula Karen. She's in charge of my water quality group. But that's it for now. And on your side?
okay, my name's Paul McKelk, Chair of the Berlin Board. Sue Regera is our clerk. Bob Wheeler is member. Donna Trailer is our administrative assistant. Stan Rogalinsky and yeah, Jim McNichol, both are with First Parish Church, as is Barry Eager.
And Kathy.
Kathy.
Hill.
And I'm sorry, Kathy Hill. There was a new name on me.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad everybody could change their time to this. Again, apologies from DEP. We misread an earlier email thinking this meeting had been canceled. So,
Nope.
so the reason, I know it got back to us sometime back, and I think there's been a lot of conversations for a while about potentially the First Parish Church decommissioning from being a public water system. And that is your right. If if you can drop out of being a public water system and not be regulated by DEP, you can do that. But based on the information that we have and the results of the water quality testing that's been done, we thought it was important to give you guys kind of all the information about what happens if you do declassify as a public water system. So to start with, there was a to start with, you guys have had a nitrate problem out there for quite a while. And I think you guys have been providing bottled water to everybody there because of the nitrates for, I think it's been a couple of years now.
Yep.
It just seems like a couple of years. Kind of COVID blurs everything into, was it pre-COVID, during COVID? That's kind of a time breaker. So you guys have had a nitrate problem out there for a while. You were required to sample for PFAS, and you did find PFAS at elevated numbers in both your wells. So we'll take that information and put it to the side for a moment. There was a sanitary survey that was done out there recently. I think, Nicole, you did the survey. And I believe I'm hoping everybody has seen the survey that we issued that identified a number of items that needed to have been corrected or need to be corrected if you're going to continue to be a public water system. So going back to our hearing that you guys are still thinking about declassifying, I thought it was important to loop in Bill Brookings at the Board of Health to talk about, if you were to declassify, we had a number of things in our sanitary survey that we had identified that I wanted them to have their input of, if you stayed as a public water system, you're still under our oversight and responsibilities. But if you went and declassified, you would end up being under the Board of Health. And I wanted Bill and the Board of Health to take a look at the list of items in the survey to determine whether or not any of those items would still need to be done. So you guys had an understanding of what was going to need to be done from the Board of Health's point of view if you declassified. In those internal conversations that we were having about declassifying, it became apparent that we needed to have this meeting. By declassifying from being a public water system, several things happen. You are right now grandfathered for the location of your well at this location. If you were to declassify and no longer be a public water system, you could never reclassify as a public water system using that well. We would require you to try to get a compliant well, a compliant zone 1. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is why I invited my good friend Rebecca to join the meeting, is the levels of PFAS in your well are, for drinking water, you are currently being regulated by me. In our regulations, we have multiple programs dealing with the same type of contaminant. And right now you're being regulated by the drinking water program. If you were to declassify because of the levels of PFAS in the well, you would end up being regulated by the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup because the levels are above their number of 20. So Rebecca, could you just give a really brief broad strokes as to what that would entail?
Sure. For sites that are what we call sites that are locations and they're in our regulations, which is 310 CMR 40, which we call the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. Sites that are under Bob's jurisdiction are exempt under our regulations. But if you were to not be covered under the drinking water regs under Bob's group, then it would become one of our locations in waste site cleanup. And the process in waste site cleanup is our standard is 20 parts per trillion or 20 nanograms per liter, which is the current drinking water standard as well. And so what would happen is you would need to hire a licensed site professional, and they would need to do quite a number of things for the site, which would include assessment, which includes putting in monitoring wells, taking sampling of the monitoring wells, sampling of locations around you to determine where this came from. And this does tend to be an expensive endeavor to hire a licensed site professional and go through the steps. This would also be considered a notifiable concentration where you would be required to notify our group to let us know of this release and or rather the detection, the concentration in your well. This is the same regulations that govern an accidental spill of, like a car accident or a tanker truck, that kind of thing. So I use the words concentration and release because it's covering the same sort of situation. So you'd have to hire a licensed site professional. They would do sampling and assessment, try to figure out where it came from, where is the extent of the PFAS contamination. And then there's basically becomes in the system, in our system, and becomes a regulated site under our regulations. So that's it in sort of a nutshell.
Right, thank you, Rebecca. And once we're done, we're happy to answer questions. So what's unique about, one of the reasons why it's being handled somewhat differently in the two programs, but not really, because you guys were in an Office of Research and Standards determination was made, and it was determined that, I think you guys all got that. It was determined that for drinking water, you are going to need to put treatment on for PFAS. And frankly, you still need to address the nitrates. So in our program, TNCs, transient non-community public water systems, which is what you are kind of in a funny spot in our program in terms of their number for PFAS. But in waste site cleanup, if you're over 20, you're in their system. So what would end up happening, and again, this is your choice. I am not making a choice as to whether or not you guys are going to remain a public water system or not. If you decide you want to no longer be a public water system, you would, you either through Kim or directly from yourselves would send me a letter stating that, the various things that are causing us to be a public water system, having the pizza nights, and to be a public water system, it's serving more than 25 people 60 days a year. Churches are pretty unique in the fact that we automatically count to 52 days. And then it starts, are there spaghetti nights? Are there pizza nights? Are there other activities that take place at the church that start adding on to those number of days? Some churches in our system, some churches are not in our system because they don't do anything, or at least we're not being made aware of anything other than that. So if you guys decide that you're going to stop the activities that would trigger you from being a public water system, I would make sure I would confirm with Bill and the Board of Health that those activities have stopped. And I would issue you a declassification letter that would state that, you're no longer a public water system. And frankly, you wouldn't be able to become a public water system utilizing your existing well. And because you're already in our system and Waste Site Cleanup knows what your numbers are, you have, I believe, 2 hours, Rebecca?
Yes, the concentrations are in the 2-hour notification category. So you would technically have 2 hours once you receive that letter to notify Waste Site Cleanup that there's these concentrations in your well.
At which point you would then officially move over into the Waste Site Cleanup program and be regulated by them. So that's kind of the big broad strokes of what's going to happen based on your decision of declassification. I can say I realize I am the harbinger of bad news. Let me try to give a little bit of good news. EPA has given Massachusetts $38 million as a grant to help out small and disadvantaged communities and public water systems. They asked for priorities from the regions, and we put First Parish Church on as one of our priorities. The final decision on those grants has not been made. Paula and I just got out of a meeting. We're not too sure when those decisions are going to be coming. But we did put you guys on that list as a regional priority from Central. It doesn't change, it doesn't change your decision of what you want to do or classify or declassify, stay a public water system or declassify. But if you stay a public water system, if you are awarded some of that grant money, then it would be available. I don't know if that money's also become available if you declassify. I just can't get an answer to that question.
Right.
So again, this is not DEP putting, we're not trying to put a thumb on the decision making. We're just trying to make sure that you're aware of whatever the decision is, how it's going to go. Kim.
Hey, Bob.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about some of the things that you said.
Sure.
If they do decide to declassify, would they still have to spend the money to decommission the 2 wells that are there?
That I would, honestly, I would end up, that would be a waste site cleanup question. Because you're no longer, if you declassify, Bob is just a thought in the distance. I'm no longer involved.
Okay. And the other question, if they do not declassify, can they still move forward possibly with the grant money, abandoning well number 2 that has the elevated nitrate and manganese in it, and tie both buildings into well number 1, which would only have the PFAS to deal with for treatment?
So the short answer to that is yes. The longer answer is if you decided to continue to be a public water system, we would work with you in terms of a corrective action plan to come into compliance. However that is, whether it's abandoning one well and tying them both together, whether it's putting treatment on both wells, we would work with you to in the end, we want you to be in compliance, and we want the water that's being provided from both wells, frankly, to be safe for everybody to use.
Thanks.
And we can work on a timeline for that. Yes, Susan.
In order to help the First Parish Church and its representatives here, it would help if they understood from Rebecca when she said it would be expensive, how kind of put a ballpark around that possible expense so that they can actually make an informed decision.
That's a good question, and I wish that I could give you a number, because our regulations cover everything from concentrations in your wells that you're finding, and would be a relatively small location, to the regulations cover up to a tanker full of diesel flipping over on the highway and spilling thousands of gallons of petroleum into wetlands and wells and whatnot. So I can tell you the compliance fees for filing certain reports run in the thousands of dollars a year to file just the fees that go along with the submittals. But you would be hiring a licensed site professional, usually works for a professional environmental and engineering consulting firms. And they bill out at rates of $100 to $300, possibly more dollars an hour to do work. And so going through the various stages, I mean, again, this is a rough ballpark. It could run anywhere from 30,000, 100,000 or more, depending on the extent of the assessment and the investigation and everything else. What we would require at the initial stages is what we call immediate response actions. And those are the provision of bottled water or the installation of a point of entry treatment system on the wells so that people aren't drinking water with PFAS in it. And that is sort of a lower expense. Those treatment systems on residential homes, I have heard, run in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $6,000 just on one home. But you are a PWS, and sizing wise, I don't know if it would be the same exact size treatment system. Well, you'd be declassified if you were in waste site cleanup. So so that would be an initial expense, but yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could give you a more specific number, but it does tend to be expensive.
So Rebecca, let me see if I can help a little bit.
Sure.
I think for you guys, both of our programs, the drinking water program and the waste site cleanup program, are going to be requiring you to treat the water to make sure it's safe, regardless of which program oversees it.
Mm-hmm.
My program, the drinking water program, it's not that we don't care where the PFAS came from. I don't regulate that portion of it. My goal is what's coming out of the pipe and what's coming out of the faucet. Rebecca's program is what's coming out of the faucet, making sure that's safe. That's why she was talking about the POET systems. But her program goes the next step to force you to find out if the concentrations of PFAS at your location have impacted anybody else. And
Right.
you do that by sampling wells. I think it's a 500-foot radius, Rebecca.
Yep.
So so your LSP, if you hired an LSP, they would sample all the wells within 500 feet of your two wells. And depending on the results of PFAS from those, do you then add another 500-foot circle, Rebecca?
Yeah, depending if it was over 20, it would continue with another
Right.
500-foot circle. Mhm.
So now you're doing another 500-foot circle. Eventually, you may find the source of the PFAS. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you sample out and then it starts petering out, and it's all homes and there's no discernible industry or company that you can point to that says it came from here. So, and if you did potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, if you were able to find the source of the problem and then, get them to be responsible, you can file a downgrading property status. What's happening? Everything's blinking. Which gives you which says, okay, we didn't cause this, it was caused by somebody else. But I don't know if they then are required to pay you back all the monies you spent to figure out that it was them. That's not my program, I don't know. But the short answer is that both programs require you to put on treatment.
Yep.
And make sure the water is safe for people to drink.
Barry,
that's
just-
something that's-
And
Sorry.
there's a chance for a grant towards that. If we even kept on 2 wells, there's a chance to get some grant money towards that, Bobby.
Yes, like I said, we did put you guys in for our list of our priority sites in Central Mass. So just to kind of give you guys context. In the central part, we regulate the central part of the state. I have 400 and I think it's currently 426 public water systems that I'm responsible for in Central Mass. You know, everybody from down to yourselves, you know, churches to the city of Worcester and everything in the middle. So, you know, we deal with an awful lot of water systems, and, you know, when we were asked which, you know, of the 38 million, who would be on our priority list, you were on our priority list. I can't guarantee that the grant's coming. This is EPA. I have no control over that. All I can say is that you were on our list that we gave them to award money to.
Thank you.
And I hope honestly at some point I can show up and be Ed McMahon with a great big check, but I can't guarantee that. You know, it's good to have people laugh at that. I've been saying that to way too many people, and they're all too young and they have no idea who Ed McMahon is. Kim, I think I saw your hand up a second ago.
I just wanted to add to Susan's question about kind of a ballpark. Barry, a lot of the other PWSs of your size that we work with, as far as treatment engineering and installation, it's averaging anywhere from 25,000 to 30,000. That does not include testing afterwards.
And
That
one
is true.
one of the things that we do understand is that there's significant cost in designing an appropriate system for the treatment of the water and all of that too, that there's some significant money to go into that.
Yeah,
That's what we've been getting
Spend
from
it.
the engineers, that 25 to 30,000.
Right, and honestly, Barry, the fact that you have nitrates in there as well, it definitely adds a curveball to the whole thing.
Let me comment on that because, and you heard Kim already say a little bit about this. It was my understanding that we'd gotten some permission to disable well number 2, which is the one that has the nitrates in it. And that we want to connect our buildings together so that we can put everything on well number 1. And then we would have one water source to treat and test as opposed to having 2.
Yep.
And if we were going to putting in a treatment system, we'd rather put in one treatment system than 2. In regard to having to use the second well.
And that's a perfectly good plan. The only thing that I get nervous about, and we've seen it in some cases, is one property providing water to another property. If for some reason the parsonage, I think is where the second well is, if for some reason the 2 properties were separated and sold separately, and now the house is owned by somebody totally unrelated to First Parish Church, and they're still expected to provide water to the church, that we have had situations and issues with new owners of properties not wanting to do that. And we've had to, it makes it particularly challenging.
Yeah.
And we would try to also advise you to, in some way, capture both properties onto this, both parcels into the same property so they could never be sold separately. Because, you know, you never want to have someone owning the house and saying, no, I'm not going to give water to the church.
And never be able to get a well from the old one viable. Right.
Understood, and again, yeah,
The well,
it may not be a problem that ever happens.
Yeah.
It's just something that we've seen happen, and I'm gonna call Jim, because Jim's raised his hand a couple times.
Yeah.
And I want to get back to him.
Thank you. The first thing, just to clarify right there, it is the children's church supplies the parsonage. So it would be separating the parsonage from the children's church. So the house is not supplying
Okay, so
that water.
it's the other way around, but
Yes,
ultimately it's
right.
the same issue.
Right, right. So because just to clarify, our intention was to do the exact same thing in the middle of summer, or early in the year. The thought was we would go ahead with that, with all the treatment and those things, just outside of the public water supply. It was just because of the cost level and the ongoing costs. I mean, we're already burying ourselves in costs that we don't have the funds for. So anyway, what I wanted this other from Rebecca. So if you stay in the one system, if you don't stay in the one system, then it sets off all this other stuff. Even though we're not a manufacturing site, haven't been for 200 years on this property, we're responsible to do all those things. But if we stay in the public water, then you're just going to ignore it? Or is the state going to come in and take over and do these kinds of testings to try to determine where all this is coming from?
That's a good question, Jim. So if you're not aware, the EPA is changing the standards for PFAS. The concentration levels will be going down soon in the coming months. We don't know exactly when, but they will be coming down. We are anticipating that ours will go down as well, although we have not heard definitively when or if. But when we first started testing and doing what we call source discovery for PFAS, it was a tiered approach where the areas in the communities that we learned of that private water, like your house is a private water, it's your own well. If we learned that a community had an unusual number of private wells that were impacted with PFAS concentrations that were really high, what we call above imminent hazard levels, then we would go in and start doing what we call a source discovery. We're trying to figure out where this is coming from. And so the tiered approach was to take the areas with the highest concentrations and tackle those locations first, and then work our ways down to the lower concentrations. So there is a chance that this town could end up having source discovery actions taken by DEP to determine the source. But as far as that being a definitive, we don't know yet when or if that would happen. We need the new numbers to come out so that we can start our next phased approach on source discovery. But what we've discovered is that it is, in some communities, it is difficult to pinpoint the sources because it's such a very small concentration of things. And I'm sure that you've all heard PFAS is in a lot of things, clothing and cookware and, ski wax and everything. So in many communities, we found it's not easy to find the exact source in some locations.
like old landfills, for instance.
Exactly. Landfills can be a source as well. Mm-hmm.
So Jim, did that answer your question? Okay. And just to be clear, like I said, my program focuses on what's coming out of the pipe for finished water. It does not preclude you from trying to figure out where the source is coming from. You can still do that and do testing and try to find it, but my program does not require it.
And just to add a little bit to that, occasionally we are contacted by homeowners. And again, this is for a private well, their own drinking water well. This is not a commercial location. It's not a PWS or a public water system. It's their own private well. We have had people where they've tested it and they do get PFAS, and they call us and we say, what should we do? And we tell them to put on a POET system, a point of entry treatment system. And in those cases, an individual, because in our regulations, we do not regulate individual private well owners. But if someone comes to us and says, I have these numbers in my well, I had it tested, I'm worried about this, we tell them, put on a point of entry treatment system, a POET system, and drink bottled water until it's installed. So we don't necessarily, it's not that we don't care about individual homeowners, it's just in the way that the regulations work out.
And that could take, that could take place at the church and the parsonage. Both of those could be a point of entry, you know, a treatment, correct?
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
Very
yep,
good.
again, but the one treatment system would have to treat for both nitrates as well as PFAS, and the other one would have to treat for just PFAS.
Now, is that two different systems, Robert, or is that, is that a combined system you could put together that would treat both, or?
Well, typically for something like this, I mean, it tends to be whatever, however you guys want to handle it. We don't design for you.
Oh, yeah.
No, but like I said, we don't design, we work on options and we work with your engineer. So you guys have the ability to either, you know, treat both wells individually at the entry point for both of the buildings.
Yep.
You could combine them into one location and then treat them both at the same time. Or if the well that you has the nitrates is shut down and you only use the water from the other source and you're only treating that for PFAS, we'd probably really want to make sure that it has sufficient capacity to provide water to both properties. But that's the other option. But but you know, the options of how you do it are kind of up to you and your engineer. We'll work with anything, and in the end, we'll just make sure it's in compliance.
Certainly, thank you.
Kim, I think that we did, that there was some kind of a test done to indicate that well number one would have sufficient capacity for the two at some point.
I believe so. I don't have that right in front of me, but we would look at what is your permitted daily draw limit off each well. What do you typically use?
It was
from-
already tested and designed, yes.
Yeah.
All right then.
Yeah.
And honestly, we may have those numbers. I don't have them in front of me. And you know, I kind of run around with a chicken with my head cut off half the time.
It's tough.
Go ahead, Tim.
When we were just dealing with the nitrates from the in Meeting House well 2, the one that came online much later. That's when the resolution came forward to tie the two buildings together. You did sign off on that. The testing was done by Northeast Geo to verify the supply. I mean, he commented that well one had enough to like do a 68 unit condo unit, or something of that level.
And that's very possible.
So the supply and volume was there. The recovery was fine.
Great.
A question kind of, I spoke to Paul just briefly about this. So one of the thoughts was, because happenstance, this comes along at last annual meeting in town here, and somebody's here that's fairly familiar with it as well. But the back of a certain piece of property was sold to the town with the idea of having this open space that may be able to drill a well at some point to supply water for the center. The thought was thrown around. So I'm wondering if the Board of Health or anybody had any idea. Our thought at one point, when we look at the system to treat this water and to connect the buildings and all that, the amount that we were spending, and then our ongoing personal monitoring of that, just wondering if the possibilities, how far out that is in the future, that if that was something that can be considered, because putting our money into a well that was in a zone that is compliant, I mean, because we're aware, because I know way more about this than I wished I did. We know that neither of these are in compliant zones. I mean, there's no place on our properties that could be compliant. So that's why if we go out and then churches rebound, I'm not quite sure what the future for this 245-year-old congregation is if then it got bigger and we wanted to have public water and we just decided to go out. But anyway, bottom line question is, town people, is that anything that's that close in the future that could be considered and we put money towards that, plus look for grants from the state, or the state, is there any way
Let
to
me-
use something like that?
Let me take a stab at that, and Bob Bostwick, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my past experience with a couple of public water supplies wells here in town is that the permitting process was, well, it took about 2 years. And, you know, the town just acquired this land, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's gonna hoops that would have to be jumped through. And considering the condition of your water, I don't think, it doesn't seem to me to be feasible to wait for some future public water supply system, which the center could definitely use. I would certainly support it, but I think First Parish's candle, so to speak, isn't that substantive to wait that long. I think something needs to be done with relative to the water prior to any possible new public water supply system.
Right, so excellent, that's a really good way to put it. So for public water system wells, you have to go through what's called our new source approval process, which can be very timely and take a long time, depending on how many wells you're looking to put in, what the purpose of the well is going to be, how many people are you looking to serve, or how big of a distribution system are you looking to put in. So that takes time. And even after you put the well in, you still have to do water quality, and it still may need to be treated.
Yeah.
So, and if that happens down the road, you know, we can handle it down the road, and if it needs treatment at that point, we can put treatment on. What's happening at First Parish Church is more immediate. We know there's a problem. We know it needs to get addressed, and it needs to get addressed, you know, sooner rather than later. You know, frankly, the nitrate can has been getting kicked down the road for quite a while. So we need to get that resolved. However, in the future, if the well that you're talking about gets approved and gets installed, and it has sufficient capacity, you could potentially connect to that water system and that source, and no longer be a public water system, no longer use these wells, and just be a customer of that water system. But that's not something I think you want to plan on right now. It's not something that I'd be willing to say, okay, that's a 5-year plan that, you know, First Parish Church doesn't have to do anything for the next 5 years waiting for that to happen. I would still be looking for you guys to take care of the problem now.
Well, we've kind of learned about that. It almost doesn't make a difference because Rebecca will come knocking and we're going to owe her more money.
And Jim, that is why I really wanted to have this meeting with you and let everybody know, because my concern was you guys were going to make the decision before we had a chance to have this conversation, and the wheels of government move, and you know, I would end up declassifying and things would end up happening, and it would be, if you guys want to end up doing that, I wanted to make sure you had the knowledge of what would happen.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Let me try and put out a simpler solution, and it may not be, but you abandon well number 2, you focus on well number 1, maintain that as a public water supply system. that throws it back to you, Bob. And what would they have to do at that point? So well number 2 is no longer involved. They would run a connection from well 1 to the meeting house. There's already a connection to the parsonage and already to the children's church, which gets very little usage. What would be the next steps from the DEP's standpoint?
Well, we would look, first off, we'd be looking for a time frame for things to happen.
Mhm.
And in that time frame would be a permit for treatment that would need to be submitted to us. And Kim's group works with a bunch of engineers that I'm sure you guys have already been talking to. So they would submit the permit to us, we would review it, make comments on it. Ultimately, we would issue an approval for it. You guys would hire someone to install it. I would get notified, or my staff would be notified, that the installation's complete. And my staff would go out and do what's called an activation inspection and make sure the water quality is meeting all standards. And we would issue an activation approval, and we would just continue being a public water system with, monthly testing or quarterly testing or whatever the required testing would be going forward.
And with that would be the correction of some of the deficiencies, like a rusted isolation valve, things that are already been put
Yep.
out in print.
Yep,
That's all
so
part of that package.
that's
accomplish
a
that.
that's a really good point. So, the sanitary survey that Nicole wrote up identified several issues that needed to be addressed beyond just the fact that we have problems with the wells and the water quality. We as part of this, we would be looking for those to be corrected as well.
I
It
wanted
seems-
to ask,
Go ahead, Barry.
I wanted to ask Rebecca if, what kind of frequency would we have on our water tests if we ended up under your supervision?
So for your water, probably an initial round of sampling, because we would have the data that was collected for Bob's program.
Right.
So that would be for your wells. And then we would say the same thing about putting on the treatment system. And then we would test to make sure that the treatment system was working. It goes online, water's going through it, and you would, through hiring your licensed site professional, would do confirmatory sampling to make sure that the treatment system was working fine. And then you would probably be testing, could be quarterly, could be every 6 months, but there would be a routine interval. You would be required to make sure that your treatment system was functioning, that it was inspected, that all of the rings and moving equipment pieces to it were functioning and working. But if it was under my program and the sampling occurred within a 500-foot radius, then you would be looking at doing the same thing for any homes within that radius that were affected. So it would be what's happening at your location times the number of homes within a 500-foot radius, or continuing. Many of our locations have had more than one 500-foot radius. As PFAS was detected, it shifts out another 500 feet and then keeps shifting.
With the
Yeah.
price tag
Okay.
going up each time, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just to be clear.
Bob, can I ask, so, and Paul, just, that is what you just stated. I mean, that is the current plan we were already operating under, until the things started to change some. But the question in dealing with the design folks about the system, there's been this, one of these big things thrown out there, that fluctuation of possible costs. Does each system now that comes into online with the PFAS treatment, are we going to have a pilot study that then there's these other fees involved with in submitting for a pilot study? Or if it's a treatment that's been used to treat the PFAS before, does that have to go through this whole pilot study program?
So that's a really good question, Jim. So the issue with the pilot studies are, we know that granulated activated carbon, or GAC, will remove PFAS. We're all very happy that PFAS is a simple treatment. It's just filtration. It's either GAC or ionic resin. It's not some sort of exotic treatment. But so what we have been approving is what we're calling full scale demonstration studies, in that your engineer will put together the best plan that they have for a full scale treatment system. And what we'll do is, instead of piloting it, we're going to be piloting it as it goes into activation, and doing testing on a frequency to prove that everything works, and that you don't have to do a pilot and then installation. The other part with piloting, and again, this is for big systems, is that we're dealing with, hydraulics and loading, and yours is a nice tiny system. It should be pretty straightforward, but that's how we've dealt with piloting for small systems. We've incorporated into what we're calling a full scale demonstration study.
Just to share some information, the Board of Health did get an email from Joni Bergen this morning. She's not able to attend for personal reasons. She's reached out, according to this, to the rest of Property Committee regarding this meeting, and she would like to withdraw the request to be declassified. However, there's been no formal vote taken on that. So right now, that's an unofficial request that's before the First Parish membership and Property Committee.
And that was the email that we saw that said, okay, we weren't going to be meeting.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of timing, I know you guys, we had said that, again, we're kicking the can down the road, that I think Swiss submitted a document or an email saying that you guys were going to give us a determination as to which way you were going to go at the end of the year. And frankly, Santa's showing up next week, so it's in 2 weeks.
Yep.
So what I'm saying, I don't know where the status of the EPA grant is going to be. But I can, if it helps, if it changes your calculus as to which way you're going, I'm going to move that deadline to January 31st for you guys to decide if you're going to want to stay a public water system, or if you're going to, want to no longer be a public water system and be subject to the wayside cleanup program and the MCP. I don't know if EPA's determination is going to come out between now and then. It might not. There are too many people involved. I have no idea. But this is a lot of information that Rebecca and I just downloaded on you all. And we absolutely recognize that it's going to take a little time to digest. But I don't,
can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely, Stan.
Sorry, just real quick, and I don't know how much you know about the EPA grant. I'm just wondering, is it something that's designed to cover the full cost of this install? Is it a set dollar amount? Is it a percentage based on the total number of people that you've said are a priority? Is there a way to know, what this can and would pay for?
All I know is that it was a set number that we identified. And I don't know what's going to come out of EPA.
So, without knowing what the cost of the system is,
I don't want to say one number and then it turns out something else. And you guys are, you pull up the recording and Bob said it was going to be this.
But is it designed
Bob, right. So I can tell you that we put in for money for you. I just don't know how much or when that's gonna happen.
Okay, and then I guess my next question would be, is that just for install, or could that possibly be for ongoing? Is there, if it, say the money was $75,000 and there was, it cost 50 to install a system, could we put the other 25 in some account or something that pays for ongoing maintenance, or do we need to budget going forward for the ongoing, testing and so forth, or is this just install?
So again, a really good question, and sometimes the rules keep changing underneath my feet. Usually grants are for the installation of treatment, not for
Okay.
the long-term operations. I think you should probably, just plan on having
Operate under that.
operating costs and work with Swiss
Yep.
on what those would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else have any questions that I can try to answer?
Would,
Thanks for the-
if well number 2 is disconnected, does that, would that require decommissioning the well? I mean,
Yes.
blowing it up, basically?
Yep, because with DEP, it would require a permit to decommission properly. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that we're breaking any sort of transmission from contamination at the top down to the aquifer.
Okay,
So we don't want to end up leaving that basically road to the aquifer available
right.
and then have everything coming out of the well without nitrates. And then for some strange reason, something goes down that well and then
Yeah.
now we have to treat for that. So,
Okay.
so typically when we do this, we do require for the decommissioned wells to be disconnected and permitted. So a good question from the board for us, for the Board of Health. Bill, looking at the sanitary survey items, do you have a list of items that you would require First Parish Church to do, even if they were no longer regulated by me and they are now regulated by you?
Well, the board has sat down and reviewed the sanitary survey, and obviously if well 2's decommissioned, a lot of that goes away. And I guess we'd have to go through specifics on well 1 if that was continued to be maintained, as a private, the valves, things like that. I mean, that all seems to make sense to have in place, whether it's private or public. And obviously
Well,
treatment would be required.
Yeah, so I'm assuming, and maybe this is a bad assumption on my part, if they decided to declassify, it would mean that they wanted to continue to use both wells. Maybe they wouldn't, but my guess would be is we're declassifying, so we're gonna continue to use both wells. So I would think that, any of the list of items that were listed for both wells would be subject to needing to be addressed.
Yeah, raising the casing, I mean, that's even a requirement of the local private
Right, yeah.
well regulation. So, a lot of that list would probably still, I don't know if we have a specific list, but a lot of that list would still be something the
Okay.
board would look to be done.
Okay.
But I guess once
Again,
a
that's good for
decision
them
was
to know.
made, we could be more specific on what would be enforced. Yep.
The casing is on well 2.
Yep.
The casing issue is on well 2.
Correct.
Yes.
We have understood for a while at least that whether we remain public water supply or if we just declassify, we're still gonna have to produce water treatment anyway. And that's one of the reasons why we've continued with the idea of declassifying, deactivating well number 2, is that the well number 1 has less to treat.
Yep.
And it would be more sensible for us to work on that one and be treating one and be testing one rather than 2. The costs of testing 2 wells is double the cost of testing 1, so.
Yep.
Yeah, can I just have a second just to be sure, while we're all here, I just want to be able to clarify for sure with the Board of Health as well. So you know that as we've worked with the DEP through this, I mean, from the time that the nitrate problem came, the approved solution at that point was to use water from the other building. So that water was brought over and bottled water supplied as well. And then when the water got worse, then the use of the water in the meeting house is limited purely to flushing and washing. I mean, we have not, and then once the PFAS was in the other well, then that water hasn't been brought over, and there's bottled water at that building and bottled water for the parsonage, and they chose to put a filter on themselves to use, and they oversaw that themselves. But the it's that, you know, and the postings, all those things. So it's not like this water has been being used and being thought that it could be. It hasn't been. And the bottled water is, we went to a bigger system so that they were used for, you know, any kind of cooking that was being done. In the past, it had been the water that was brought from the better well. But anyway, just so you know, that's how it had been dealt with, for whatever it was needed to be used for. So.
Right, and I think one of the other things to realize, and again, I'm partial, the public water systems, I think they're a good thing, knowing that the water's safe and that it's being overseen. I believe at one point there was a daycare at the church.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
My guess is that once the nitrate problem happened, or might have happened before that,
No, that was
daycare
on
stopped.
that was on the other well.
Or was on the
That
other
was on
one?
the other
Yep.
well.
That was on the other well. But you know, once you guys have a clean water and, you know, compliant public water system, you know, if you wanted to bring a daycare back in there shouldn't be any issues with that. At least from drinking water DEP's point of view.
At this point, that came to be uneconomic because it was for the children that we originally got involved with public water supply.
Yep.
And but when we did away with that program, it was because there was too much competition in the community, and it was no longer a viable operation for us. And at this point, we're running a thrift shop in that space, and that's, you know, that's a workable thing, and we don't have to worry about water for it.
Understood.
This has been very helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody have any last questions before we go?
I do have just one for Rebecca. I might have missed it. I know you were talking some, and I might have zoned out for part of that. I'm sorry. Just and I know Barry and the other ones that haven't been involved with the water as much, if we're trying to be able to weigh all the apples and oranges, is there some places, there are a list of contractors that we could contact if we're trying to get a range of what costs? I had a different term in mind for these monitor wells, and that if I don't think that's where this is going, that direction, but anyway, so that we knew what that was actually entailing as opposed to just thinking about it.
Absolutely. So you would be looking for licensed site professionals. And there is an organization in Massachusetts called the Licensed Site Professional Association. So their website is lspa.org. And they maintain a listing of every certified licensed site professional in Massachusetts. Kind of like a professional engineer has a stamp and a number. Licensed site professional is something similar, a stamp and a number. They're certified. They have to have so many educational credits and renewal credits every year, take tests, that kind of thing. And that would give you an impartial list that you could pick from if you wanted to call an LSP and talk about the ramifications of potentially declassifying and keeping both wells online.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Any last questions or thoughts?
Just, thank you, a lot. And, the other thing, James, dealing with conservation buying that property, I don't know if it's conceivable that we're able to use that unless there was some deal made, until, because conservation owns it. It's, the the regs on that type of stuff.
Conservation was supposed to, or what they had indicated that they would put in their documents on that property, the possibility that a well could be placed there for public use.
Oh, very good, very
They,
good.
they were supposed to have done that, and they basically promised to at town meeting, so I'm hopeful
Good.
it's been carried out.
Yeah, well, that's good to know for the
You're ri-
future and not for this right away. And we could we extend, you extended our permit, Bob, now to January 21st, till we can figure some more out.
Right,
And
so,
if we get closer, could that
Right.
go?
right, so is it Bob or Robert?
Bobby, whatever.
You know something? Everybody that calls me Robert, I know they don't know who I am, because I only go by Bob.
Oh, there you go.
Here's what we're doing. You guys had proposed a deadline of December 31st to let us know what you guys were going to do, whether or not you were going to declassify
Yeah.
and no longer be a public water system, or you were going to stay a public water system.
Yeah.
That was a date that you guys proposed that we kind of didn't say anything to, because we wanted to have this meeting, and then this meeting just kept moving further and further away.
Right.
So I am moving that proposed deadline from December 31st to January 31st. The only thing I need to know by January 31st is which way you want to go. We want to stay a public water system, or we want to declassify. At that point, once you tell me, either I will set up a follow-up meeting with Kim through Swiss and the engineer, if you guys decide to stay a public water system,
Mhm.
to go over the items that need to get corrected, the permitting that needs to get done, and the time frame that things need to get completed by. Or potentially Rebecca may have a follow-up meeting with you if you decide to declassify, to talk about what you're gonna have to do for her program.
Okay. Thank you very
So-
much.
So that way, and if anybody on this screen has questions about what we talked about, what I said, because I did a lot of yapping, our emails are all online. Our emails were in this meeting request, even though we didn't show up immediately. And you feel free to send us any questions that you want, and we'll do our best to answer them. And Stan, if I get a number, I'll try to pass that along as soon as I can.
Thank you.
But, we're here to answer the questions, but I do want to say, I am not kicking the can down past the 31st of January for the decision. We have to make a decision, and we have to move forward with it,
Yep.
okay?
Very good.
We've
And
we've
if-
been in
if-
we've been in the
if you guys-
process.
In January, after you guys have digested this, and if you want to have another conversation, you can contact us, and I promise you we'll show up to that meeting on time. And we can talk about any other questions you have at that point. But January 31st is the deadline, and remember, not being a public water system does restrict some of the things that you've been doing, and that you would be under the auspice of Paul and Bill in the Board of Health.
Okay.
Okay?
We
Very
have been
good.
working to broaden the people in the church that are understanding of the situation. And having the 4 people here today is part of that. And we'll continue to keep doing that so that we can come up with a decision by the 31st of January.
Excellent, excellent. And again, DEP, I know we get painted with a lot of different paint strokes, and we're the government, and we're not necessarily here to help you. Our goal is public health. We need to make sure that the water that you're serving to everybody, whether it's in the parsonage or the thrift shop or wherever, is safe for everybody to use. And that's our goal.
Same as ours, the Board of Health in Berlin, that's what we're trying to do upon it.
Exactly.
So Bob and Bob, on that vein, one of the questions of the church being the moral high ground of this whole thing. So the question has come up, is it our responsibility and or does the Board of Health or the state, if you found, seeing as how we're having our water tested and the well, especially the well 2 is along a street where children live, do any of the neighboring things get informed that PFAS has been detected in this area and you might want to have your wells checked? Or should we be informing the neighbors that, hey, we've got the cold over here, you might want to, get immunized or check your, what I'm saying? And who does that?
I'm to be honest with you, I'm gonna defer that question to my staff person, Paula Karen. She deals with an awful lot of public notices that go out, and we tend to focus specifically on the public water system and not the neighboring communities. But Paula, do you have any thoughts on what Jim's asking about?
About the ongoing public notice for like
About potentially notifying neighboring users.
That doesn't occur for drinking water as a public water system. It's just your customers have to be notified. So it's postings, it's direct delivery, like hand delivery, like to the residents, and posting in conspicuous places and to employees and making sure that they're updated. So everybody's knowledgeable, because some contaminants are more sensitive, have a more sensitive subpopulation where maybe if you're immunocompromised, if you're an infant with nitrate, methylbulimia at a certain age, manganese over also a certain age, like 10 days for infants of 12 months, and then a certain another level above that for adults. So there's different variations depending on how long you drink the water. So it's making sure everybody's informed of, if they drink the water, what their risk is involved with that.
So Jim, I guess the short answer to that is we don't require any notification that you, the church, have to give your neighbors. All of your information is public, so people can look on the state website to see what the results are at First Parish Church. But but anybody can test their well at any time and do their thing.
You'll see ongoing notification every 90 days. So you got to do notice every 90 days for the nitrate problem. That's for the MCL at this point.
Yeah, I didn't mean it.
And
I
then
was
also,
looking to see if the community did anything for the other people that might be within the same aquifer. That's what I was trying to find out. That's okay. Thank you.
It might be
No,
different
that's
when
okay.
it's the wayside cleanup.
It sounds like it's a Bob or Paul and Bill question.
Well, I think PFAS is out there. I'm sure there aren't many people that haven't heard about it. So as a private well owner, it would be a personal choice to test that well themselves.
Yep.
I don't think the board has discussed any type of notification at this
No,
point.
we have not.
Okay.
But you also haven't had too much evidence of a cluster in that regard, have you, Bill?
No, I'm not aware of much testing actually in town. Even back when the program was available. I'm not sure Berlin took
Not
part
too,
of that.
there was very few.
When we've authorized several new zoned wells in town, correct, Bill? Public water supplies that have come up very good, right?
I don't know the results of any public water supply testing other than the church that we've discussed on PFAS.
Well, no, what I mean is, the villages had new wells put in. We put new wells in down by the mall, or the Rockwell. Those came up. Those are very good, right? And
Again, I'm not familiar. I think we'd be notified if there were issues.
Those were DEP
yeah,
situations,
right.
Bob.
They were all under DEP. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right,
And-
folks, we're kind of running on going beyond our hour and a half time frame here.
Everybody will chip in, Sue, don't worry.
Okay,
All right,
thank,
well, thank you all.
All right.
First Parish has some work cut out for them, decisions to be made, and hopefully we get some answers that work for everybody before January 31st.
And as Bob had said, DEP is available for questions. Myself and the Board of Health are also available. Just reach out.
I
Thank
hope
you.
everyone has a happy and safe holiday season. And, you know, we'll get this resolved.
All right. You too. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks,
Okay,
Bob, you
thank you.
too.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you all.